Hello, everyone, and welcome back once again to our Redeemer Lutheran Church Bible study on the book of Acts. I'm Pastor Eric Kleinschmidt from Redeemer Lutheran Church in Highland, Indiana. Sorry about last week. I had a funeral on Wednesday, and as you know, funerals kind of take up all your time, and they push everything back. So back again this Wednesday, right before Thanksgiving, to cover two chapters today, chapter 24 and 25. That is our goal for today. Let me get that set up for us. All right. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I will put the link to 2 weeks ago, the study right up above here. And then also I have a request. As you may know, Redeemer is beginning a large building project to repair a boiler leak underneath the concrete. We need to tear down half of our building and rebuild it to the tune of $2 million. And on this Thanksgiving week, if you are at all thankful for this content here, I would ask, would you please throw a few dollars Redeemer's way? I'll put a link to our online building fund donation form below. However, I think we can switch it over to here. Let's see if I can get this right like that. There you go. This is our website, and right there is a link to donate online. Would really appreciate that if you've appreciated this content, if you've learned something from this Bible study, or you just like me in general or this building. We'd be much appreciated if you'd throw a few dollars towards our building fund so we can keep doing it. All right, commercial over. Back to our text. All right. Today, we're going to continue the drama of Paul in front of Felix the governor. All right, now Paul has been arrested at the Jerusalem temple. He has been charged with stirring up the people. Now the Roman tribunal has gotten involved and he has sent him to the governor of Felix, Antonius Felix. And now Paul is going to be dealing with official Roman law. That's going to take some time. He's going to be passed off to another Roman governor, Festus, and then eventually, as the story continues, he'll make his way to Rome under Nero. That's going to take a long time. So we're in the middle of that whole drama-filled thing of Paul getting from Jerusalem to Rome, all right? So let's look up chapter 24. Let's see. And after 5 days, okay, this is 5 days that Paul has now been in the custody of the governor of Felix at Caesarea. Remember that from Jerusalem, he had a military escort because, they kind of made a mistake in that they had him arrested and they almost had him flogged without trial, which was a big illegal thing for a Roman citizen. They didn't know Paul was a Roman citizen. Paul gleefully reveals that to them, and they all go, uh-oh, we're in trouble. So they are trying to cover their behinds with this. So they ship him off out to Caesarea under high guard. He's there for 5 days, and now the high priest Ananias came down with some elders. Now these are Jews, and the spokesman named Tertullus. And they laid before the governor their case against Paul. And when he had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, so now this is the Jews from Jerusalem accusing Paul in front of Felix, the Roman governor. All right? This is what they say. Since through you we enjoy much peace, and since by your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this nation, in every way and everywhere we accept this with all gratitude. This was a lie. All right? It was an outright lie. Felix, according to history, was a terrible governor for the Jews. He was part of a successive campaign of the Roman leaders in Jerusalem to really kind of stick it in the eye of Jewish culture, including Caligula, the emperor, had a plan to erect a statue of himself disguised as Zeus in the Holy of Holies of the Jerusalem temple. Okay, the place where the Ark of the Covenant should have been, Caligula had plans to put a statue of himself, okay? And the Roman governors kind of were working along with him to do this. The only thing that really stopped Caligula from doing that was that he was murdered, okay? But the things that are being done by Rome like that in Israel, particularly in Jerusalem, will eventually lead to the Great Jewish Revolt in 66 AD, to which they capture some of the Roman forces. The Rome comes in with legions of soldiers and puts it down, and they actually destroy the temple and burn most of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So that's the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Felix is a part of that, as will his successor Festus also be a part of all of that led up to that. So these were not good governors. The Jews are lying about this here, all right? But they're just trying to curry some favor. Number 4, but to detain you no further, like, oh, we'll be respectful of your time, I beg you in your kindness to hear us briefly. For we have found this man a plague, one who stirs up riots among all the Jews throughout the world, as is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Now, we've talked a little bit about the Nazirite vow being a specific vow that's made in the Old Testament, that you devote yourself to God for a time and you don't cut your hair, you don't drink any wine, that sort of thing. Jesus was not a Nazirite. He was not under that vow. Jesus was a Nazarene. He was from Nazareth, okay? Because the disciples, including the next generation of disciples like Paul, followed Jesus. And which Jesus? Jesus of Nazareth. Here, apparently, we're learning that some people referred to them as the sect of the Nazarenes. For much of the world, they thought of Christianity not as its own religion, but rather as a sect or a different set of beliefs within Judaism, okay? So you have the Pharisees, you have the Sadducees, the difference between them being the Pharisees believe there's a resurrection from the dead, the Sadducees do not, and now you're adding these Nazarenes in there. Is kind of the way that the world looked at this. But it also shows us that these Jews, Tertullus, that's the spokesperson, didn't really fully understand Christianity. They didn't understand who Jesus of Nazareth was. So they just refer to it as the Nazarenes, this cult of the Nazarenes, all right? They also say he tried to profane the temple, okay, but we seized him. That wasn't exactly true, because they simply accused him of trying to bring in a Gentile from Ephesus. They simply found them in the same place, and then they accused Paul of trying to bring him into the temple. All right, so this isn't exactly true. Then they say, by examining him yourself, you'll be able to find out from him about everything of which we accuse him. And Paul must have been just like going, oh, I can't wait for this, right? The Jews also joined in the charge, affirming that all these things were so. Yeah. And when the governor had nodded to him to speak, Paul replied. All right, so now we're going to hear Paul's defense, and Paul actually has the facts on his side. All right, so he says, knowing that for many years you have been judge over this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. Again, he appeals to Felix. You can verify that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship. So he's even given a time frame. I've only been there 12 days. How could I do all this? And if you want to talk to anybody about these events, hey, it wasn't that long ago. Go ask him. And they did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up a crowd, either in the temple or in the synagogues or in the city. Neither then can they prove to you what they now bring up against me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way, and this is the words for Christianity, the name is called the way. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, which they call a sect. I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets, having hope in God, which these men themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. Okay, let's back up. Paul says, I believe in the God of my fathers, okay? And he's saying that we share a commonality in that, but we are different. You cannot say that Judaism and Christianity are the same. They are not. They are not any more similar than that flour would be to pizza. Okay? Judaism is a precursor to Christianity. It is what leads up to the full expression of God in Christianity. As Jesus himself testified, the law and the prophets point to me, he said, right? So they think that Christianity is a sect of Judaism. Paul is saying that's not true. That's what you call it. But fine, yes, we do share a common ancestry in that we have an Old Testament, we share that, but we have very different understandings of what that means for us today, okay? So Paul is not arguing that he and Judaism are the same anymore, all right? He's saying, I accept everything that's laid down in the law and written in the prophets, and I have hope in God, and I believe in the resurrection. So now Paul, one of the ways that he escaped Jerusalem by being torn apart by the crowd was by pitting the Sadducees and the Pharisees against each other. Paul had previously been a Pharisee. They believed in a resurrection from the dead. It's the Sadducees that didn't. And when Paul brings that out, as they're all talking, like, hey, we hate this Paul guy, he says, well, wait a minute, you hate me because I believe in a resurrection. And everybody at first goes, well, no, that's not what we're doing. And they go, wait a minute, is there a resurrection? And then they start arguing about that. And they split along those party lines, right? So Paul, he throws some raw meat in the pack of the fighting dogs that are coming after him, and they fight amongst themselves, all right? And it's all about the resurrection from the dead. Verse 16. So I always take pains to have a clear conscience between both God and man. He's praising himself to Felix. After several years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings. He says, I bring charitable relief to these people. I have gathered money from other places, and I'm bringing it here to your city, your province, Felix, in order to do good. I'm a philanthropist, is what he's saying, and they want to get rid of me. Okay? Paul is doing some smart arguing here. It's not untrue. He did do this, right? While I was doing this, presenting his offerings, they found me purified in the temple without any crowd or tumult. All right, now if you go back to Acts 21, you remember what Paul was doing. When he came to James, James told him, we need a way to win over the crowds that have been told lies about you. So we have 4 men who are under the vow, probably the Nazirite vow. Take these men and purify themselves along with them and pay their expenses in the temple that they may shave their heads. And then that the hair is burned as an offering to God and this sort of thing. Thus, all will know that there's nothing in what they have been told about you, but that you yourself also live in observance of the law. James comes with a plan for Paul to curry favor with the Jewish everyman, not the leaders that were slandering him, all right? And there's nothing wrong with Paul doing this. He doesn't maybe share in their Nazirite vow, but he sees no bad thing about saying, okay, well, yeah, these people devoted themselves to 40 days of prayer, and now they're going to shave their heads, and everybody's going to go, well, thank you for praying for all of us, that sort of thing. So Paul does that. He purifies himself. And so that was James's plan for Paul to win favor with the people. It actually works out. Paul is now using that to his advantage. He says, they found me in the temple, purified. So I wasn't doing anything wrong, without crowd or tumult. And you can ask people who were there, he says. But some Jews from Asia who didn't know anything, they're outsiders, Felix. They're coming in from outside. They're rabble-rousers. They ought to be here before you to make an accusation should they have anything against me. Paul is appealing to official Roman law that you have the right to confront your accusers. It's something that's been handed down to our laws today, okay? He's saying these guys aren't even here. Again, you're not following the law, Felix. Paul is very knowledgeable about what rights he has as a Roman citizen. How Paul gained that, we're not really sure, but he definitely has an understanding of the law. Or let these men themselves say what wrongdoing they found when I stood before the council. Other than this one thing that I cried out while standing among them, that he quotes, it is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you this day. Paul is saying, yeah, I said that to try to get them to annoy themselves. He's admitting to it. He said, if that's wrong, then fine, but what else have I done? Let them accuse me. I have a right to face my accusers. But Felix, okay, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, we have no idea why or how Felix understood Christianity, okay? But the Bible tells us that he did, a rather accurate knowledge. He puts them all off. And he says, when Lysias, the tribune, that was the one that took Paul out of Jerusalem and into the fortified Roman barracks, okay, to protect him, and then sent him on to Felix. He says, when Lysias shows up, then I will hear your case, all right? So he gave orders to the centurion that Paul should be kept in custody but have some liberty, and that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. To be arrested in this way is akin to like house arrest, but contrary to the way we do prison system in our society today, in Rome, if you were put in prison, you were pretty much on your own to provide for your own needs. They didn't provide meals. They didn't provide recreation. They didn't provide clothing, okay? So if you didn't want to rot in a cell and starve to death, you had to rely on visitors who would give you things or briberies that you could get it from other people. And so Felix says, listen, let Paul's friends come to him and minister to him. That's going to be important because this is going to last 2 years. This house arrest is going to last 2 years, okay? We're going to get that. Back to the text. After some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla. All right, this is actually his second wife of 3, because he marries 3 times. And it's actually the second woman he marries that is named Drusilla. The first one was Drusilla of someplace, and this is Drusilla of Judea, okay? It was the wife of one of the Herods, I think, or something like that. He enticed her away. She divorced him and married Felix. So, all right. So now you have a Roman governor married to an adulteress from Judea, okay? But she's Jewish, all right? And they're curious. So they sent for Paul and they heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. That's what Paul does. And as he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment, Felix was alarmed and said, go away for the present, and when I get opportunity, I will summon you. So Felix says, this is too much for me to take in, but I'm curious. So let's talk again, is basically what they said. But now we're seeing like there's an ulterior motive to Felix. At the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul. So he sent for him often and conversed with him. Felix is looking for a bribe. Plain up. And why does he suspect that Paul has money? Remember what Paul said earlier? That he brought alms to help his community? So Felix goes, oh, he's got money. Well, I wonder if he'll give me money to let him go. Instead, Paul goes, well, no, that's not going to happen because that's money not meant for you. But hey, while you think that I'm going to bribe you, I'll let that go on for now, and I'll continue to talk to you about Jesus. So Paul gets an opportunity much like John the Baptist had with Herod, that Herod actually heard John gladly, even while John was telling Herod that it was not lawful for him to have his brother's wife. It's history playing itself out right in front of us. And then eventually John is beheaded, all right? Paul will escape that fate, at least at the hands of Felix here. So, verse 27, when 2 years had elapsed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. Okay, so desiring to do the Jews a favor. Felix, in his governorship, had a lot of conflict with the Jews, all right? And he realized that if he let this get to a riot, he would be in trouble. He also realized that how they report back to the emperor or the higher-ups would affect his future hopes for anything. And so his last thing is to try to throw the Jews a bone, all right? He said, well, they don't like this Paul guy. I could let him out before I take my next station, but I think I'll just leave him in there. And then when Emperor Nero asks, well, how was Felix as a governor? The Jews who are in charge of here, particularly King Agrippa, who we'll meet here in a second, will say, oh yeah, he's great. He really does care about the Jewish cause here. You know, he did a great job. That's what he's hoping for. So Felix is an opportunist. He absolutely is, as is Festus, as are most of the Roman governors and leaders of Judea at this time. And that's one of the big reasons why it leads to that revolt in 66 AD, and then Rome coming in and putting it down and destroying everything, including the temple in 70 AD. All right? So Paul is left in prison. He's been there for 2 years, and now Festus is the one he has to deal with. All right? So now we're going to jump to Acts 25. Now, 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, so he's brand new, right? He's probably not even unpacked yet. He went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea, and the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul, and they urged him, asking as a favor against Paul that he would summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way, all right? So they get the new naive guy in, and he says, listen, Felix didn't do this. He left it for you to deal with. I know you're new, but we've been waiting for this for 2 years. The charges were laid here in Jerusalem. Why don't you just summon Paul to Jerusalem and we'll be done with this, all right? And they're hoping that he's too dumb to know what they have planned, all right? But Festus is going to throw a wrench and he's going to short circuit their ambush plans without probably even knowing it. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. Festus is like, well, I'm not going to bring him here because I'm going there. It's dumb. All right. Now, whether he's playing dumb or whether he's just saying, well, I don't have these plans, so I'm not going to do what you say, I'm not sure. Festus then says, so if you want to talk about him and you want to deal with this, let men of authority among you go down with me. And if there's anything wrong about the man, let him bring charges against him. Festus follows the law, the letter of the law, and he follows common sense. And it must have frustrated the plans of the Jews that were planning this ambush to kill Paul and murder him. After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, as he said he was going to do. The next day, he took his seat in the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. He said, okay, let's see this guy. He's like 2 weeks on the job here. Paul argued his defense. When they had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him. So they came with Festus, and bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. All right? So Luke is writing this, and he's saying, like, they really couldn't prove any of this. They still couldn't. They had 2 years to gather evidence, and they couldn't. Verse 8, Paul argued in his defense, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. Paul is proclaiming his absolute innocence here. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul. So here Festus has the same point. Now he's new on the job. He wants to win the goodwill of these people that he's going to have to govern, lest they report to Agrippa that he's a terrible governor, and Agrippa take it to Caligula or Nero, it'd be Nero at this point, and then Festus loses position. So he's trying to curry favor at the beginning, whereas Felix was trying to curry favor at the end by doing the Jews a favor. But we see this idea. So wishing to do the Jews a favor, Festus says to Paul, do you want to go up to Jerusalem and be tried on these charges before me? So Festus says, okay, well, they've asked for a change of venue from Caesarea, all right, to Jerusalem. And so he says, do you want to go? Because we could do that. But Paul has a surprise, all right? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer, and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go. All right. In the Roman law, every Roman citizen had the right to have their case tried in Caesar's court. That doesn't mean they get audience with Caesar, but they have a right to go there. It's like the Supreme Court, okay? We don't have to go through all these little underling courts to get there. But in Rome, he says, no, I'm invoking my right to be heard in Caesar's court. Paul, he is aware that they have plans to kill him. We read about that earlier before, that his sister-in-law or his nephew, I think it is, finds out about it and tells him, all right? So Paul knows that something's up. Whether Festus knows that or not, we're not really sure. But Paul says, you know what? I know that this isn't going to go well, so they want me to come to Jerusalem. I would rather plead my case before Caesar. Isn't it weird that Paul, I suppose it's not weird because he was a Jew, he was a Pharisee, and he figures that he's going to get a better audience with Nero than with his own countrymen. Nero at this time hadn't begun his wide-scale persecution of Christians, okay? I think Nero probably didn't know much about Christianity at this time. He's just like, okay, whatever. It's this weird group of Jews that don't really think they're Jewish anymore, and some guy rose from the dead. So, but he's not begun a hatred of Christians yet. And so Paul is saying, I think I'd get a better audience with Nero than I would with my fellow Jews, so send me there. And he has that right, all right, as a Roman citizen. And this must have really worried everybody that didn't realize that Paul was a Roman citizen from the beginning. Because if he spills the beans and says, yeah, I was arrested without trial. They even tried to flog me until I told them that I was a Roman citizen. And then, Nero goes, well, who are these guys? And then Paul names names. And the next thing you know, that they're beheaded because they didn't uphold the laws of Rome. All right. So Paul is playing some really acute politics here. He appeals to Caesar, and that's going to get him to Rome. And Festus says, yep, all right, we'll do that. Okay? Now, when some days had passed, Agrippa the king, now this is Herod Agrippa, keeping all these Herod straight, okay? This is not Herod the Great, all right? He's Agrippa the first or Herod the second, I think that. And his wife, Bernice, I'm guessing, arrived at Caesarea and they greeted Festus. Now, this is a Jewish king. He's of the Herodian dynasty. He's one of the last, if I recall. But he was educated in Rome, and he spent a lot of time in Rome, and he is very active in Roman politics. In fact, it is Agrippa that often gets these governors placed in Judea. So Festus might have owed his job to a good word from King Agrippa, okay? So that's the interplay that we have going on here. But Agrippa is a Jew who's king, but he's a puppet king of the Romans. And he loves being Roman, by the way. He'd rather be Roman. That's why he spends so much time in Rome. Agrippa, the king, and Bernice arrived at Caesarea. They greet Festus. After they had stayed there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a man left prisoner by Felix. Like, he left me this guy, and I don't know who he is. When I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews laid out their case against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him. I answered them that it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accusers face to face and had opportunity to make his defense concerning the charge laid against him. So when they came together here, I made no delay, but on the next day I took my seat in the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accusers stood up, they brought no charge in his case of such evils as I supposed. Festus himself admits that the charges had no weight, that Paul really hadn't done anything wrong. Rather, he says in verse 19, they had certain points of dispute with him about their own religion, about a certain Jesus who was dead, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. Being at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wanted to go to Jerusalem and be tried there regarding them. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of the emperor, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. So he lays all this out to King Agrippa. He says, this is one of your people. He's a Jew like you, and I don't understand all this. So can you help me wrap my head around what's actually going on here before I send him on to Nero? Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear this man myself. And Festus says, tomorrow you'll hear him. Notice how Agrippa kind of has to defer to Festus here. He has to say, I would like. He doesn't say, well, this is a Jew, let me deal with it. He says, no, could I listen to him? And it's actually Festus who says, yeah, tomorrow it'll be so. So you can tell who's in charge. And that even though Agrippa is the Jewish king, the Romans are in charge, okay? But still, he's an important guy, all right? Verse 23. So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp. The Herodian dynasty was famous for this. They loved ceremony. They loved showing off their wealth. They loved pretending to be more in power than they were. That's one of the reasons why when Jesus is sent to Herod, different Herod, Herod wants to see him do a miracle. He wants Herod wants Jesus to perform for him. And when he doesn't, then he sends him back to Pilate. So we get an impression that in the Herodian court, since they didn't really have any real political power for Judea, they spent most of their time just enjoying their wealth. At least that's the idea. And so you get kind of this debauched circus going on in the Herodians all the time. So they come with great pomp, and they entered the audience hall with the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. Then at the command of Festus, notice that Festus is still controlling everything, Paul was brought in. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all who are present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish people petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. Crucify him. It's the same thing they did to Jesus. Again, Paul is witnessing to the life, death and life again of Jesus Christ by basically living out the same things that happened to Jesus. Similar results too, but we're pointed. And anybody that is familiar with the Passion and Holy Week of Jesus can't escape these similarities here. But I found that he had done nothing deserving death. Pilate actually says that verbatim in the Gospels. I find nothing in this man deserving death. I will have him flogged and release him, right? And as he himself appealed to the emperor, I decided to go ahead and send him. He has to. He's bound to. He's legally bound to. It's not like he's doing some favor here. But here's the thing. Verse 26, I have nothing definite to write to my Lord about him. Therefore, I have brought him before you all, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable in sending a prisoner not to indicate the charges against him. Now, Festus knows that the charges against him are stirring up the people, all right, of causing riots, that sort of thing. Those are going to be pertinent to Roman authorities. But Festus doesn't believe them. And so he's saying, I don't really know what to write on the line of why I'm sending them to Nero. But I have to send him because he has appealed. But I don't want to look like a fool, and I don't want to look like I'm not doing my job. But I don't really understand what's going on here. So, King Agrippa, you're a Jew. You're the king of the Jews. I need you to examine him and tell me what to write on this line before I send him to Nero. So he acknowledges that there really are no real charges against Paul, but he's also saying, I still have to send him to Nero no matter what, and I need to indicate something. So he's asking for Agrippa's help and permission, in a way, to do that, because he doesn't understand all the intricacies of the Jewish religion, and he certainly doesn't understand this sect of Christians, or the Way, or the Nazarenes, or whatever they're calling them here. We have no indication that Festus had the same knowledge of the Way that Felix had, that we're told he had. So he might be just admitting his complete and utter ignorance of the whole thing. And in that sense, he's really doing a smart thing. He's asking somebody who would know these things to kind of inform him. He's also trying to pass the buck, I think, a little bit. He's also just trying to say, like, I got to govern these people, and if I release this guy by saying there's no charges, they're going to riot, and then I'm going to be in trouble. So he's in a rock and a hard place, and he's trying to find a way out of it, and he sees Agrippa as being the person who's going to help him out of that. Paul is going to have to give his defense then to Agrippa before he ever gets to Rome. All right, we're going to see that in the next chapter, which I think we're going to have to save for next time. You all are interested in getting towards Turkey Day. I may have some preparation, some grocery shopping to do yet, so I don't want to keep you any longer. But what we see here is Paul is using Roman law to his advantage. We're seeing the hatred of his own countrymen as somebody they perceive as a traitor, right? We also see just the voracious hatred of the gospel that Paul is proclaiming, right? It's interesting, and we just talked about this in confirmation class last night as we talked about Lazarus. So when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, right, the immediate response of people is they flock to Jesus, and Jesus then rides into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. And we're told that many came because they had seen that he had done the sign of raising Lazarus from the dead back in Bethany. All right? The Pharisees and the chief priests, when they hear that people are believing in Jesus because he literally raised Lazarus from the dead, they're the first people who should have said, all right, if he raised somebody from the dead and there's this many people who saw it and believe in it, maybe there's something to it. The Messiah is said to give life to the dead and raise them from the dead, so maybe Jesus is the Messiah like everybody's been saying. Maybe we should believe in him. That's what they should have done. What do they do instead? They plot to kill Lazarus. Poor guy. He dies. Jesus raises him to life, and the first thing that the people want to do is put him back in the grave because he's a problem for the Pharisees. So that sort of mental attitude is what Jesus is dealing with here. And it's one of the reasons why Jesus is so abrupt and so, I don't want to say mean, But he just doesn't have time for their nonsense. Jesus is at odds with the Pharisees and the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, because they should have been the first to recognize him as Messiah. But instead, in their stubbornness and in their desire to keep the status quo going where they have power, they're fighting against him. The same thing happens to Paul. And again, Paul's life is meant to point us to the events that happened to our Lord Jesus, just as Paul's words point us to Jesus. So, in our sufferings, in Paul's suffering, he's actually proclaiming Christ who suffered before him. This is also one of the biblical themes that we see in the New Testament. All right. So Paul is a living embodiment of faith in Christ and the truth of the scriptures, because the same things that happen to Paul are the same ones that happen to Jesus, just with different characters. Instead of Pontius Pilate, we get Felix and Festus, all right, that sort of thing. But we still have the Jews basically saying, away with him, kill him, and the Roman authorities saying, there's really nothing to do with that, but they're afraid of a riot breaking out. And with good reason, because as we said before, just some years after this, in 66 AD, they're going to have that revolt. And the Jews are going to be successful in assassinating some people, in winning some battles, some major battles, of creating fortified cities, Masada being one of them, if you've ever heard about Masada. And eventually the Roman legions come in and they just level everything, including burning much of Jerusalem and burning and destroying the temple. And so the Jews lose the very thing that they were fighting and so zealous about, because they just got fed up, right? And Felix and Festus, they play a part in that. Paul is using his Roman citizenship to his advantage. He's working within the government. He's proclaiming his innocence. He's not lying about anything. And his whole goal is to get to Rome in order to preach in Rome. And he sees that he is going to get that prayer answered. Maybe not in the way that he would have liked, but that often happens, right? Our prayers are answered, but not in the way that we wanted or expected. And Paul is content with that. He says, if I got to go to Rome to die, fine. I just want to get to Rome to proclaim. And now he's on his way. He's just got to jump through a few more hoops to get there. Happy Thanksgiving to you all. Please join me next week, assuming that we're free to come back next week. Don't have a funeral, don't have anything else going on. And we'll continue the saga of Paul trying to appeal his case to Caesar. And we'll also see how that turns out for him. Thank you. As we talk about Thanksgiving, I am thankful for all of you, especially those of you who tell me that you watch and that you do enjoy it, because it does take a significant investment of our time here to produce these sorts of things and prepare them for you. So it would all be for naught if I didn't hear that you do enjoy them and that you do get something and learn something out of them. So God's blessings to you, and we'll see you again next Wednesday. Thank you.